We are winding back the clock to the preseason to take a look at our final 2023 schedule prediction and see where the Dolphins are on their current path versus that preseason prediction series for wins and losses.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Today is Thursday, November 9th, 2023. The Dolphins don't have a game on Sunday. They are on the bye, which means it's bye-week content time. We got a lot of great stuff coming your way. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase for a first deposit match of up to $100. Now, I have my handy-dandy notebook here for those of you who are on the YouTube channel, and I have written down the final schedule prediction that I had from the beginning of the season. And what's interesting about this is when I went through and divided all of the games based on the information that we knew at the time, everything that you thought you knew about every NFL franchise and every team for 2023 going into this season, there were three separate buckets for the Dolphins and their opponents that the games were classified into. You had your divisional games, you had games that were classified as layups, and you had games that were categorized as other or a la carte or the rest. And the stated objective was to give yourself a chance to win the division. The Dolphins needed a win total that was 11 on this. My final schedule prediction did have the Dolphins at 11-6 coming into the year, and it had them finishing as the runner-up in the AFC East behind the Buffalo Bills, and the New York Jets finishing at 10-7, a game behind the Dolphins, and also qualifying for the playoffs. That, of course, was before the Aaron Rodgers injury. So if you think about being 6-3 at the bye, that helps if your stated objective before the season was 11 wins. But it gets even more interesting for me when I actually look at the distribution of the buckets of games that we classified. Our stated objective to get to 11 wins was to go 4-2 in the AFC East. The Dolphins have played 3 AFC East games. They played the Patriots twice and the Bills on the road. They are 2-1. They are on pace for 4-2 in the division. They play the Jets. And I think the Jets is a team that we should spend quite a bit of time talking about because the Dolphins will play them twice in a month. And that's going to be a team that I think really decides where this team lands on the spectrum of postseason contenders for the schedule. The Dolphins had 4 layup games that were identified, and what stands out the most about this is the Dolphins currently have 6 wins, and they've only played one of the games that I would classify, or I did classify at the beginning of the season, as a potential layup contest. The Carolina Panthers, who picked in the top 10 last year and had the number 1 overall pick. Their next layup game on the schedule. So they have 3 games that at the beginning of the season were perceived to be layups. You have Las Vegas, Washington, and Tennessee. And there's some dynamics with those teams. You have 3 very inexperienced quarterbacks between now starting at quarterback for the Raiders, Aiden O'Connell, Sam Howell in his first year as a starter for the Commanders, and Will Levis has been named the starting quarterback in perpetuity for the Tennessee Titans. Ryan Tannehill, it's no longer about health. He's been benched. Miami's 1-0 with 3 left to play in that bucket. And the pathway to 11 was if you went 4-2 and then you hit your layups. That's 10 games played. That'd be 8 wins. The magic number is 11. You'd need to get 3 out of the other 7 games on the season. The Chargers, the Broncos, the Giants, the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Cowboys, and the Ravens. The Dolphins have already hit 3 in that bucket. They could lose their final remaining 2, the Dallas Cowboys at home and the Baltimore Ravens on the road, and still meet the forecast and the projection that was laid out at the beginning of the season. It's great. It's helpful. It's very helpful to know that you've checked that box. You're halfway to the divisional games box. And if you overachieve in one category, say you were to beat the Dallas Cowboys, that puts you ahead of schedule for your others, or it gives you wiggle room to not hit a layup. Not that the Dolphins want to do that. But you take everything for what it is at a surface level, and we have very high expectations for this team. And I think the high expectations for this team came courtesy of the way they won in week 1 against the Chargers on the road, exercised the demons of the 2022 game, and then scoring 70 points against the Denver Broncos in week 3. Because you've come into every contest since, and the Dolphins are the number one offense, the number one scoring offense. They're averaging 40 points per game in their wins. It's like, yeah, they scored 70 points in one game. It almost have been better if they scored 45 and won 45-30. Because then you don't get into this stratosphere of historic offense where everybody's expecting 550 yards and 40 points every single week. Sometimes you're going to score 17 points. It's okay. So doing this exercise and revisiting where the Dolphins are, 2-1 in divisional games, 1-0 in their perceived layup games, and then 3-2 in their a la carte games to give them that current record of 6-3 on the season, certainly puts things in perspective for where Miami can go from here. Now, I think one thing that we should probably do is recalibrate expectations for the remaining opponents. Are there things that need to be moved around? Would you classify any of the only question is whether or not you perceive there to be layup games that are not layup games, or there were layup games that you no longer to consider to be layup games. And that's what we're going to do next. We're going to talk about those 5 games because we need to talk about the Jets, but that's divisional. We can recalibrate those expectations based on what that team has done thus far and kind of update the expectations for the remaining opponents that the Dolphins have as we revisit our 2023 schedule prediction from the end of August. And by the end of the show, provide you with an updated new schedule prediction for the remainder of the season, knowing where the Dolphins have fallen to this point in time. But it's important to remember this. In the actual schedule prediction, I had the Dolphins at 5-4 at the bye. And I had losses in Germany to Kansas City, in Philadelphia to the Eagles, in Buffalo to the Bills, and in LA to the Chargers. So I know we do week by week and we do crossover Thursday, and I pick the Dolphins just about every week because the team, I'm enthusiastic about the team. I host the show around the team. I do believe this team has what it needs to be a great football team this year. And you want to believe that, right? Well, if you really zoom back, wind back the clock, the Dolphins are a game ahead of what my season prediction was for this football team. So keep that in mind as we talk about the year-to-date opponents for those that the Dolphins have yet to play and what that means for an updated forecast for this 2023 season and what it will look like with the standings at the end of the road. That's up next here on Locked On Dolphins. But first, we're going to have a little bit of an appetite. We've been busy this morning. We did Locked On NFL Scouting. I'm now doing Locked On Dolphins. It's getting close to lunchtime. I might have to tap in with my friends over at DoorDash and get lunch delivered here to the house. Now, they have all of your favorite groceries, all of your favorite local restaurants, all of your favorite retail available on DoorDash to make sure that you need the things that you need and can get them at a time that's convenient for you. You don't have to leave the house. You know, you can make the selections and they will deliver it to your door with DoorDash. So for me with lunch, it's probably a Green Turtle kind of day. They've got great bar food there at Green Turtle. The French fries are really good. The hot wings, you can ask Joe Marino, from my co-host on Locked On LCI. The hot wings there are hot. So I'm not a big spicy guy, so I'll stay away from the hot wings at Green Turtle, but some wings always hit the spot. So whether that's for your tailgate or your home gate, DoorDash has you covered and can make sure that you are prepared for game day. So you stock up on your favorite appetizers and order all your tailgate gear. On DoorDash, you can get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. When you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23, that is $10 value up to 50% off when you spend $15 or more on your first order. And then download the DoorDash app, use code LOCK23 to make sure that you get that offer here on Locked On. That is subject to change and terms do apply. So the games that the Dolphins have played, New England is Not the opponent we thought that they would be at the beginning of the season. The Carolina Panthers are exactly what they thought we would be at the beginning of the season. The LA Chargers, they've climbed back to 500. They just beat the Jets convincingly in spite of having how many yards? It was like 190 something yards of offense against the Jets on Monday Night Football, and still managed to win by 3 touchdowns when it was all said and done. Pretty eye-opening stuff there. Yeah, they had 191 yards of offense, 107 passing yards, and beat the Jets 27-6. That moved the Chargers to 4-4. The Jets dropped to 4-4. But the Chargers I had nailed down as a loss just based off of last year's game, having to go there. The Dolphins obviously rose to the occasion and won that game, and I think that's a critical game because it does give you wiggle room. Denver is a team that has quietly started to stabilize their performance this season. They are 3-5. They have won their last 2 football games against the Packers and the Chiefs. They forced a turnover in 5 consecutive games. They have a total of 11 turnovers across that stretch of time. And the last 3 weeks, they've held opponents to under 20 points. That's the same team that the Dolphins put 70 points on. And look, coming out of the bye, that Broncos team has at Buffalo, Minnesota, Cleveland, Houston with a rookie quarterback, the Chargers, the Patriots are on that list, the Raiders are on that list. This Broncos team, when it's all said and done, they might, I don't think make a postseason run, but they might make a run for 500. And of course, that's that magic number that the Dolphins can't beat. Philadelphia and Kansas City are what you thought that they would be. I think the Buffalo game you got at an unfortunate time because the Bills are a team that's really struggling. And of course, you still have that game left on your schedule, week 18, where you are in Miami playing that game. And there's a lot that could potentially be on the line there. I won't spoil kind of how the schedule prediction unfolds, but Buffalo has incurred a lot of injuries going back to that loss in Jacksonville the following week after the Miami game, in which the Dolphins played that game without so many key pieces, without Connor Williams, without Teron Armstead for the second half, without Deshaun Elliott. So many critical components for Miami without Jalen Ramsey that you certainly lament the timing being what it was, and you certainly would like to think if you played them again, they don't score 48 points because, you know, the Bills, they haven't had a no turnover game this season since the Miami game. They've had 2 turnovers in 4 of their 5 games, and that includes 2 turnovers and a 5-point loss to the Jaguars, 2 turnovers and a 5-point win against the New York Giants, who the Dolphins boat raced, 2 turnovers in a 4-point loss to the New England Patriots, and 2 turnovers and a 6-point loss to the Cincinnati Bengals. They had 1 turnover in a 6-point win that was about 6 inches and a half a second from Chris Godwin from being a 1-point loss. Bills sitting at 5-4. They're home the next 2 weeks against the Broncos and the Jets. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Bills when we get into the schedule prediction at the end of the season. So Buffalo, not quite the team that we thought that they would be, but you caught them at probably the most inopportune time for when the Dolphins played their schedule. Not to say that they would have won that game. I expected them and picked them to lose that game in August anyway, but you know, I don't think that's a four touchdown difference between those 2 football teams. As far as recategorizing the layups, because, you know, Dallas is 5-3. They're very competitive in the NFC East. They just took the Eagles to the wire. They're a good football team. I think they're maybe a little more one-dimensional offensively than what you thought that they might be. They've got a really good offensive line. The Dolphins have played a lot of good offensive lines already this season. Their passing game is a little more lethargic. I think they're hoping for someone else to emerge aside of CeeDee Lamb, and it's just not happening. That defense is fierce, but Trayvon Diggs is out for the season. That changes some of the dynamics. And of course, Miami will play that game at home. So you'd like having that extra dynamic as well. The Baltimore Ravens certainly are not getting recategorized as a layup. That's the only 2 non-divisional games that you have left to play. You've got that aren't categorized as layups. Dallas and Baltimore, 1 at home, 1 on the road. Miami has already checked the requisite box of 3 wins out of that bucket from the beginning to hit 11 wins on the season. And that's important to remember. They're 3-2 in those games. And they took 2 road losses at Philadelphia and at Kansas City. Las Vegas, Washington, Tennessee. I still regard these teams, especially with the Dolphins personnel, looking the way that it does. These are games that the Dolphins should win. You got 2 out of the 3 at home, including the Raiders, who you are catching technically on a short week. They play on Sunday Night Football against the Jets before they have to come to Miami for a 1 o'clock kick in week 11. So you've got a little bit of you've got a rest advantage for the Dolphins being on the bye. The Raiders are half a day behind the normal schedule anyway. It's a home game for Miami. They've already fired their head coach. This will be the third game with the new coaching staff. Aiden O'Connell's your starting quarterback. From a personnel standpoint, Josh Jacobs ain't even what he's supposed to be. I view this game as more of a must-win now than I did at the beginning of the season because of the shortcomings of the Raiders. Washington, I know this is a competitive team, as sitting at 3-5, I believe, on the season, or 4-5 on the season. Excuse me. They have their bye week 14, and that, I think, you look at the dynamics that are at play there. In 2 of the 3 weeks prior to the Dolphins visiting Washington, they are at Seattle and at Dallas. That is big time travel, and that is big time opposition. And say what you will about Washington with their 4 wins. Their 4 wins have come against the Patriots, the Falcons on a big time choke job with 3 turnovers in spite of Washington not even getting 200 yards of offense. The Denver Broncos in week 2 is a 2-point win. That was a Hail Mary away from being a win, and they blew a big time lead in that game. And then a win against the Arizona Cardinals in week 1 by 4 points. So I know there's a whole contestation that exists about strength of victory with the Dolphins in general right now because of the strength of the Dolphins victories themselves versus their record versus teams over 500. But I checked the chart. The Chargers are going to make a run at this thing and hopefully put that thing to bed this week if they beat the Lions. I do not think Washington is a particularly good football team. And they traded at the deadline their edge rushers that were one of the hallmarks of their defense. Now, they got really stout players on the interior, but so did the New York Giants. And I would argue the Giants have better defensive personnel than what the Commanders do at this stage, especially after the trade deadline and trading Chase Young and Montez Sweat. Sam Howell is the most sacked quarterback in the NFL. They do not have a good offensive line. Those matchups should favor Miami. I am very firm on that continuing to be a layup win, regardless of the fact that the Commanders have 4 wins. Which just leaves you now with the Titans. And Tennessee is an interesting team because they have played a lot of close football games. They lost by 1 point in week 1. They won by 3 points in overtime against the Chargers. They lost by a touchdown in the Colts in week 5. They lost by a touchdown and 2-point conversion in London against the Ravens. They won by 5 points against the Falcons. They lost by 4 points against the Steelers. They're at Tampa Bay, at Jacksonville the next 2 weeks after that. Then they're home against Carolina, home against Indianapolis before they play the Dolphins on Monday Night Football in Miami. So I do think Tennessee is a team that if they can steal the Bucs game, they could come in with some momentum against Miami. I could see this team winning the Bucs game, probably losing at Jacksonville. That will put them at 4-6, 5-6, 6-6. That may be a 6-6 team coming into that Monday Night Football contest against Miami. They, however, and I know I alluded to this earlier in the show, they're 24th in scoring offense. Will Levis has breathed some life into that passing offense. Ryan Tannehill was abysmal. 2 touchdowns to 6 interceptions on 158 attempts. He was sacked over 10% of his dropbacks. I like the timing for Miami. I'd be somewhat interested in potentially bumping Tennessee out, but I do think the defense, having traded Kevin Byard, the pass rush has not been to the standard that you expected all season long. Some of these close games were close games in the same spirit of the New England Patriots games being 1-score games because Mike Vrabel's off of that tree by extension. They keep it close and hope to push the right buttons in the fourth quarter. And I think that won them the Chargers game because they did not outcharger the Chargers, but it bit them in the Saints game. It bit them in the Colts game. It bit them in the Ravens game, and it bit them in the Steelers game. So I like that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have another month of tape of Will Levis. I think the advantage the Titans have right now, especially with Tampa Bay this week, is they are going to be playing with very little tape. It's like 2 games worth of tape on Will Levis and what he does and how he changes the offense. For Miami to have a rookie quarterback that is playing behind the offensive line that exists in Tennessee versus the defensive line that the Dolphins have, and having a 6-7 game sample size of tape of Will Levis and what they actually do as compared to what they did with Ryan Tannehill, I think gives them a big enough body of work to get adequately prepared. And the Dolphins are an overwhelmingly more talented football team playing at home. I'm not changing it. I'm going to keep everything exactly the way that it is. Now, what does that mean for the predictions? I'm glad you asked. We're going to talk about that to close on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so stick with us. You and I spend a lot of time talking with one another. We get fired up for wins, and we get even more fired up for losses, most particularly this most recent one against Kansas City. Who starts, who sits, and I'm thankful for the connection that we have in the platform that I have here on the show. Today, I want our chat to be a little bit more personal. Nobody should be caught unprepared. And there is a lot of uncertainty that exists in the world today. So you should be empowered to take care of yourself and your loved ones during the unexpected, which is why we are so proud to partner with Jase Medical. Jase Medical, a Jase case can get you up to 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. And all it takes to get one is to fill out a simple online form and in some cases jump on a quick call with one of their board-certified physicians. You can go right now online to jasemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medications. And remember to use code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. One verified customer had this to say about Jase. I'm thankful for this service. The supply chain issues caused me to cut my pills in half in order to have my medication. I ordered most of my daily meds within a year's supply, and I also received an antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I highly recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily med, go to jasemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your purchase. The rest of the way. The only team we didn't talk about is the Jets. I would like to think Miami could split these two teams against Dallas and Baltimore. I like what Baltimore is doing. They are obviously boat racing teams. They absolutely walloped Seattle. They walloped Detroit. Miami's had some success against this football team. They made a big scheme change offensively. So I acknowledge that. But the Ravens, this schedule doesn't let up. And the Dolphins are at the tail end of it. Now, they're at home, but Miami's on Baltimore's going to be in a short week coming home from the West Coast for this contest week 17. Miami getting Dallas at home. We kind of talked about how they're a little one-dimensional offensively. Miami being at home is a big feather in their cap with how well they perform in that stadium. Just looking at Baltimore and acknowledging the wide receivers are very incomplete. And Baltimore's putting up a lot of points on teams right now and doing it in ways that really relies on a predatory defense that really gets after opposing offenses. And Miami has struggled with that at times. Would like to think as you get deeper into the season, you get more reps, you get more opportunities, you have more answers to handle some of that. I'm not saying they're going to beat the Ravens. I'm saying I think if you gave me Dallas and Baltimore, I do think they win one of those two football games. But Baltimore, right now they're in the conversation. They're tied for the best record in the AFC. They go Cleveland this week, Bengals, who are as hot as anybody in football, Chargers, who have climbed back to 500. Then they have their bye. Then they're hosting the Rams. Okay. At Jacksonville. At San Francisco on Monday Night Football before home against Miami in Week 17. That schedule's tough. That schedule's very tough on the back half of the season. And you foil that versus Baltimore played a lot of games in this past month, the friendly confines of their home stadium. They will continue to do that the next 2 weeks. They get Cleveland in Week 10, and then they get Baltimore, they get Cincinnati in Week 11. That 2-game stretch ahead of at Jacksonville, at San Francisco, home against Miami feels a little bit like Miami's stretch. San Francisco, LA Chargers, Buffalo, home against the Packers. from last year. That's what that stretch feels like to me. And then Baltimore's at home to finish against the Steelers. So I say all that to say, I think between Dallas, some of their offensive clunkiness, Baltimore from a personnel standpoint, your ability to match them when you catch them, I think they go 1-1 in those two games. I do think they hit the 3 layups against the inexperienced quarterbacks. I think they win against the Raiders. I think they win against the Commanders. I think they win against the Titans. So if you look at the Dolphins from a schedule standpoint right now, 6-3. Home against the Raiders, 7-3. Then you get the Jets on a short week on Black Friday. Is that a win or a loss? I think that game is the game that determines what stratosphere we're talking about for the Dolphins from a playoff perspective. Because after that, you get a little extra rest and you go at Washington and play the Commanders. We think that's a win. And you play the Titans. I think that's a win. You get the Jets at home. I think that's a win. And then you feel like they're going to win one of the 2 games between Dallas and Baltimore. You're looking at potentially a 6-1 stretch. And that is what these teams that end up making postseason runs do. They get healthy at the right time of year. Look no further than San Francisco. San Francisco last year was 4-4 going into their bye week. 4-4. They won the rest of the games in the regular season. They ran the table. And they ended up finishing the season 13-4. You talk about good teams going on runs, separation season. This block of games, if you want to include Dallas at home, it's the next 6 football games. The one tricky game that you really look at that's a wild card is that Jets game on Black Friday. And you'd like to think the Dolphins can avoid the negative plays that gives the team like the Jets life. Because you reflect on this New York Jets team, and they're 4-4, and they have a very, very, very good defense. But they are 2 plays away from being 2-6. They are a punt return in overtime and Josh Allen completely losing his mind in week 1 with 4 turnovers. Single-handedly, Josh Allen lost in the game. And it still took a punt return in overtime to beat the Bills. And then just in week 8, the Giants had -9 passing yards, rushed for 203 against the Jets. And were in the final 30 seconds of that football game. The Giants missed a field goal that would have put the game on ice. The Jets go down the field in 2 plays, kick a field goal to force it to overtime and make it 10-10. They were a missed field goal from the Giants kicker in the final 30 seconds from 40-something yards out from being a loss there. Can you avoid the negative plays? Because the Jets, when they beat the Eagles, they had 4 turnovers. When they beat the Broncos, they had 3 turnovers. When they beat the Bills, they had 4 turnovers. Props. You beat the Giants with Tommy DeVito and held them to -9 passing yards because you get to overtime and Brian Daboll said, I don't trust him for the forward pass. So we're going to get the ball in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd down. We're going to Saquon Barkley. We're going to swing, run everybody vertical down the field, and hope Saquon Barkley can create something out of nothing. And that's how you won that football game. It's the only game the Jets have won this year without 3+ turnovers. The Chargers had 270 yards of offense and won by 3 touchdowns. Yes, they kept it close against the Chiefs. They scored 10 points against the Patriots. They scored 10 points against the Cowboys, turned the ball over 4 times. If you stop doing what you have been doing in some of these games, and that includes Carolina and includes New York Jets, includes New York Giants, then you should beat the New York Jets twice. And if you do that, then you are going into week 13 or week 18 potentially with a 12-4 record while playing the Bills at home. And what does that mean for leveraging and postseason and this, that, and the other thing? We just talked about the 6 games that the Dolphins are playing. We perceive to have 3 layups. You have 2 divisional games against the Jets. And then you have a home game against Dallas. Buffalo, their next 6 games. They're, of course, the team right now that's in 2nd place. And if you beat the Jets twice and you don't turn the ball over against that football team, you will not have to worry about them in the standings because they are already at 4 losses. So 2 to Miami would put them at 6, which means the most games they could win if they ran the table elsewhere is 11, and it ain't going to happen. And we're talking about getting the Dolphins to potentially 12 going into week 18. The Bills, home against the Denver Broncos, home against the New York Jets. At Philadelphia, bye week. At Kansas City, home against the Cowboys. At LA Chargers. Reminder, the Bills have 4 losses right now, and they still have to go to Philadelphia and to Kansas City. If you take care of the next 6-game block and you protect the football against the Jets' opportunistic defense, you are talking about potentially playing for playoff seeding as high as the 2 seed in week 18 if you're able to beat the Bills. So everything that you want is on the table. If I had to guess, you probably go 12-5, which means I'd realistically hold firm with all my preseason expectations and just say, hey, they won a game in week 1 that I didn't pick them to win. I picked them to go 11-6. Now they're 12-5. Injuries can change all of this picture. But I thought it was important to look at the schedule, tangibly look at the schedule, understand what some of the other teams are facing, what the performance of the teams on the schedule has done to change their perspective, and realize we're all frustrated that the Dolphins lost to the Chiefs by 7 points and Tua had a miscommunication on 3rd down and then dropped the snap on 4th down. It's right here. And it starts with the Raiders at home. And the Dolphins, as a football team, they would be wise to take this 1 week at a time, but we don't have to do that. And I'm sitting here telling you, based on what I thought in the preseason, my updated opinions of those teams, if you don't give the Jets life at MetLife, you take care of business, this team's going to be in business, and there's not going to be a lot of drama about week 18. The question's going to be, this team's going to have a home playoff game. The question is now going to be, what seeding do you have and who do you play? For the record, with my schedule prediction being what it is, if the Dolphins were to win in week 18, they would knock the Bills out of the playoffs. They would finish 13-4, and they would have the 2 seed in the AFC, losing on record head-to-head tiebreaker against the Kansas City Chiefs. They would play the Houston Texans the first round with how I picked the games. If the Dolphins lost the week 18 game, if they said, hey, we can't get the first round bye, we want to rest some players, it's inconsequential, it doesn't matter, the Dolphins would finish 12-5. They would be the 4 seed, and they would play the Baltimore Ravens at home in the first round of the playoffs. I would much rather prefer you win the game week 18 in that scenario, but it's home playoff game in the first round either way. But obviously, if you're the 2, you're setting up potentially 2 home playoff games. You'd have a lot to play for. And Buffalo would be playing for their playoff lives. If they won the week 18 game, Buffalo would get into the playoffs and be the 6th seed. So they would have to go to Jacksonville, who is the 3 seed, with how I pick the games, courtesy of playoffpredictors.com. So that's where we stand. I still have a lot of belief in this football team. I know the conversation from the big picture and media perspective, big media perspective, is going to be insufferable as it pertains to the Dolphins and what they can and can't do. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter until it matters. And it doesn't matter until week 15 right now, week 16, really, what you can do against teams that are considered the upper echelon of the NFL. And if they continue to do what they've done all season long that they're being criticized for, they will win the next 5 football games. And I don't care how good you think we are if we're 11-3. Because we're going to have a chance to put it to bed when it actually counts. That's it for Locked On Dolphins today. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day. Talk to you again soon. Fins up.